Okay, so after a really long wait, we have finally got the Razer Blade 18 into the studio. Now this one's been delayed a couple of times, so this has been really anticipated. Now we're going to do a quick unboxing, some first impressions today, and a full review coming in the next week. So let's get opening. Also, please excuse my voice, I'm still not 100%, but certainly on the mend. So thanks very much for all the kind comments over the last few videos. Right, so opening the box, you can see that they've basically now got an outer cardboard box with some of the print inside, and inside you get another box, which is the more traditional black Razer box, and the power supply. So let's have a quick look. This is a new 400 watt power supply. So this is the biggest I've ever seen on a Razer Blade, and that is, wow, pretty chunky. So there's my UK power cable and the non-braided standard Razer Blade connector there. Packaged in an unusual way. That is a pretty odd way to get a connector out of a box. There we go. So here we go, 400 watt power adapter. That is heavy and that is chunky. Certainly the biggest Razer adapter we've seen yet. We will put that up against some of these smaller adapters so I can show you the size different later on. Right. Let's get rid of that large box. And here we have the main event. The Razer Blade 18. Opening the box, we can see the laptop itself is covered in a little material. Put that to the side for a second. It feels quite weighty. And we then have a little package. Thank you for choosing your Razer system. Information for the support. Thank you from the CEO. Razer Blade stickers and a small user guide, pretty much as you would expect. Now the Razer Blade itself. There we go. So, looks pretty standard from the top. Let's turn it over because this is where it looks different this year. Now, it looks very much like the size of a Razer Blade 18 from the last couple of years, except we now have this new thermal hood. Now, this does stick out further than the laptop, which does actually make the laptop itself a little bit thicker. But this should give us bigger fans for a much better combined GPU and CPU load. And we do get this nice window this year. So this does light up apparently. We'll have a look at that when we fire it up in a bit. So you can see we've got the two fan vents as well either side of the window. There is another fan in here at the bottom, and I guess that's the vents for that there. And we've got the speaker grills, front feet, then we've got a whole rear back strip lifting it up. Then we've got venting all along behind there, and quite deep venting out the back here. So it's not just coming through the hinge, it is pumping it out the backside where it's lifted up. So we should have much better thermals on this Razer Blade than we have on the previous one, the Razer Blade 18, at the expense of a much fatter laptop. Now, as always, it's going to be a fingerprint magnet. Ports are very similar, as you can see. Use your Razer jack, RJ45, 2 USB-A, and a Thunderbolt 5 port. And then we've got our headset jack. Then on the other side, we've got HDMI 2.1, a Kensington lock, another USB-A, another Thunderbolt 5, and a full-size memory card slot. So these 18s do have a good array of ports. Let's open it up. So there we go. Now, if you're used to seeing the Razer Blades, this is the first time we have had a number pad on a Razer Blade 18 or 17. So the keyboard now always used to be centered, obviously much larger, smaller speaker grills, and that dedicated number pad. Not quite sure how I feel about this because I did quite like having the centered keyboard. I don't really like a number pad on a laptop. I will use them on a dedicated keyboard, but I always find they crush them right up against the enter key, which is something I'm not a big fan of. Do wish they'd separate them a little bit. Now I've got the 5080 version with the Intel Core Ultra 275HX. So this is kind of the mid-spec. There is a 5070 Ti and there's also a 5090 version available. Now this one came in at about £3,600 in the UK, but I know the American price for this is quite brutal at the moment. I'm guessing a lot of that is to the tariffs. So actually for a change, it's cheaper in the UK than it is in America, and that's an absolute first. Now I'm going to quickly just stop here for a second and get past all the setup and Windows updates to save wasting everyone's time. We're going to come back and take a thorough look in a second. Okay, so we're back. I've updated Windows and set myself up and updated signups, so we're all good to start looking around the laptop. Now, first of all, I want to start taking a quick look at the lighting. So I've put it on just the Rainbow Wave, which is one of my favorite color schemes. So as you can see, the whole keyboard is lighting up with the Rainbow Wave. And as usual, we have the Razer lit logo on the back of the lid. That can be static, off, or flashing. And then new for this year, with that glass panel underneath, we have the Razer Vapor Chamber lighting. Now, because I've got this on the Rainbow Wave, you can see we have the Rainbow Wave underneath. And that does look really stunning. I think that looks really nice. But it is a bit pointless because who is ever going to see that? So nice touch, but a bit of a waste of money. Now coming back to the actual upper deck itself, I want to quickly show it up against my 2023 Mercury Razer Blade 18. Now they are very similar in size, as I say, except for the fact that this one is now higher because of that cooling hood. But at the front you can see they're very, very similar. I'm actually liking the fact they have slightly shrunken the actual touchpad this year, because this one was just a little bit too big. I still think the new one is slightly too big. Palm projection is pretty good so far. Performance-wise, the touchpads feel and track pretty much identically. Now, whilst I've got them both open quickly, and before we look at anything else, I do want to just quickly talk about the size difference at the rear, just in case anyone is interested. If I just quickly put them both side by side, you can see how much taller this new Razer Blade 18 is, because we've got this big gap under here now because of that thermal hood. So you're going to get better airflow underneath. It is, let's say, I don't know, what's that, about a centimetre higher than the previous model. And I think it's going to be easier exhausting that hot air out this year. Although we had good vents on the 2023 and 2024 from the last couple of years, this exhaust is much bigger on this 2025 model. Yes, I'm hoping that grille's going to help push that extra air out, that hot air out of the system for that 280 watt cross load. Now, back to this keyboard lighting. One lovely feature this year that they've added, or two lovely features if you're in Europe, we've now got secondary functions are actually backlit. This is the nice thing with the dual lighting that they've added on the 16 and the 18 inch this year. So holding the shift key down switches to your secondary lights there, look. And if you hold the function key down, it will switch to your multimedia keys and command keys. Really loving that fact. And also with this number pad over here, if you switch number lock on, your numbers will light up. If you switch number lock off, it changes to your secondary characters, which is your macro keys and your profile switcher, your microphone mute button, and your trackpad disable button. These are really useful features. Now, because I'm not using this as a number pad on the laptop very often, I've usually got it set to this mode because I love that profile switcher. That's really handy. You've also can switch on game mode from within here. These can be reconfigured in the sign-up software, and we will look at that in a little while. And lastly, being a Razer, we have the power button in the top corner still. Now, either side of the keyboard, we've now got these new smaller speaker grills, but I believe the speakers are pretty similar, so we're going to test those now. So speaker test of the 2025 Razer Blade 18. Now we're going to use our Razer Blade 18 2023, so we can compare it, and we're going to start with that one. So let's see how it sounds at 50% volume. Now the new 2025 version. Okay, now moving up to 80% volume and starting with the 2023. Now the 2025. Finally 100%. So there we go. That's a bit of a surprise, but despite being very slightly bigger than the last year's 2024-2023 model, the speakers were actually slightly worse in our opinion. Both are really good speakers, but the older 2023 model that I'm testing here in Mercury just felt like it had a little bit more bass. Now I did make sure that both had the same EQ selected, so there's not a difference in the EQ, so not really sure why the new model's not quite as good as the old. Now, as we move up to the screen, sadly, it is an IPS panel. I know a lot of people would have liked mini LED or OLED. There isn't an 18-inch OLED yet, but they could have put mini LED in here. But the IPS that they've used, it is a really good panel. It's very bright, about 540 nits. It's matte. It's 4K plus, so it's just over 4K in resolution, and it has great color accuracy. It's also 240 Hertz, so it's a great panel. But it can also switch. So if you're finding that you can't drive your games at 4K, you can switch it down to 1200p, 440 Hertz. So maybe you're an esports player, or maybe you've got a really hard title to drive and even DLSS won't cut it at 4K, you can drop this down and play it at 1200p. Now sadly, you do need to do a reboot to do that, and you need to go into Synapse, and you can see here in the display tab, we have 4K plus or 1200p for 40. So if I click on that, reboot, obviously the biggest thing I've found so far is I'm at 200% display scaling. When you then chuck it down to 1200p, it keeps that 200%, so everything's massive, so you are going to be mucking around with your scaling. But if you're an esports player, this could be a very good option for you. Now, whilst we're talking about the panel, it is a very color accurate panel, and they give you a number of color profiles that can also be switched within the actual Synapse software as well. Now, I'm in the Synapse 4 that comes with this 2025 range of Razer Blades, and I'm really enjoying this new Synapse 4. It's working really well on these Razer Blades, and I'm liking the fact that we have a lot more options than we did with the Synapse 3. Now, I like in the performance now, we have silent, balance, performance, turbo, and a custom option. You can also adjust fan control, but strangely, you can't adjust fan control in the custom. Now, that is a bit odd. Now, within the custom, again, you've got your usual CPU low, medium, high, and GPU low, medium, high, and then the max. But you can also do CPU undervolting or overclocking with this laptop. Now, I haven't played around with that too much yet. I certainly will do for the full review, but it's nice that this is unlocked. And that's something that I do like to see. I hate it when you get an HX chip and then they lock it down. Now, as we move above the screen, we've got the webcam, which looks and sounds like this. This is a test of the webcam on the Razer Blade 18 2025 edition. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think this looks and sounds like. Hopefully this is a bit of an upgrade, but webcams on laptops are usually pretty rubbish. We also have a privacy shutter on the 18-inch this year, so you can see when I shut it over, it goes red. When I bring it back, you can see it's now opened back up. Strangely, last year and the year before, we had the privacy shutter on the 16, but nothing on the 18. This year, we have the privacy shutter on the 18, but nothing on the 16. So I'm not quite sure what's going on with the Razer over there. It does also include Windows Hello Facial Recognition, which I absolutely love for quickly logging into Windows. Now, what I want to quickly do now is I'm going to move over to the gaming desk. We're going to fire up some sort of games titles. We're going to look at the performance on this new laptop. Right, so I've just set up on my gaming desk. Now, I'm using a couple of Razer peripherals. They've instantly picked up nicely in the Synapse 4. So as you can see, I've got my Goliath extended mouse mat and my Death Adder V3 Pro. They now show up in a tabbed window, which is very different to the Synapse 3. Now, when I move to the actual Razer Blade 18, you can see I'm currently in the turbo profile. Now, this is one of the things I really like this year as well, is this stats bar. From within here, you can have a simple or an advanced view. This is the advanced, but it gives you a lot more information about your system, which we haven't had before, so I've always had to have other tools running in the background. Now, naturally, I will be running MSI Afterburner when I'm running games anyway, but this is nice to see at a glance. Now, I'm going to leave the fans on auto, and we're going to sit in turbo to do some actual tests. The first thing I'm going to do is fire up a R24, just so we can see how many watts it's going to allow us to pull on this actual CPU in the turbo mode. So I've just loaded up Cinebench R24. Now, something I do want to mention as well, when we're in, obviously, Task Manager, we have just a Gen 4 1TB SSD in here. Now, I think that is a real shame. Like with Alienware and other brands, they're coming with 2 TB this year as standard. Now, you can get a very high-end Razer Blade with 2 TB, but to give 1 TB on a £3,500 machine feels very stingy, and it's only Gen 4. Alienware are giving you a Gen 5 drive for just a few pounds extra. And then when we're looking at the actual memory, we get 32 gigabytes of slower 5,600 megatransfer memory kits. Again, Alienware and Legion are both giving you 6,400, and the laptops are probably in your region going to be cheaper than this Razer Blade. So I don't know why Razer are being so stingy this year. But let's take a look at this actual CPU. Now I've got hardware info going. We're going to fire up R24 and we're going to see what we're pulling. So at the moment, it's sitting at about 4.25 gigahertz running R24, which is torturing all of the 24 cores. Looking at the actual power consumption, we're sitting at about 138 watts. That's, 140 watts. Fans are ramping up. Now that is a lot lower than the Alienware 18 we've recently looked at. So despite being a new cooling system this year on the Razer Blade, it's not going to give you the same cooling as something like an Alienware 18. Now I want to just quickly hear the fans in this mode. So that's 55 decibels. So you're talking 55 decibels pure CPU load on this laptop. Now in the full review, we will be testing all of the profiles and the custom modes to give you a full lowdown on what this laptop is capable of. But again, so far for a Razer Blade 18, which is a bit of a more compact 18-inch, this isn't bad, but I would have liked to have seen slightly higher wattage drew there. So looking at a couple of benchmarks, Geekbench 6, we've got a single core score of 2,972, which is about what we'd expect with these new processors. Very fast and very snappy. The multi-core 17,576, which is, it's okay. You know, again, I think Razer have sort of cut this back a little bit compared to some of the other brands. Now looking at time spy in this same turbo mode, we've got a pretty good score here of 21,000 overall time spy score, 16,284 on the CPU, and a graphics score of 22,161, which is very comparable to the Legion Pro 7i and the Alienware 18 that both had the 5080 that we've tested. So now I want to just quickly fire up a game in this turbo mode so we can take a look at how well it performs and what the thermals are like. So Finals is now loading. It's going to need to do the shaders, but we can see here that it's pulling over 100 watts, well 128 at the moment. Temps, we're sitting in the 80s, so that's good. We're not hitting that 100 degrees that some laptops do. We're now at 133. Right, compiling the shaders, let's have a look. So still 130 odd watts doing the shaders. We're sitting in the 80s. So thermals is looking pretty good so far. Oh, we hit 90 there for a second. Fans have ramped up. So it seems to be about 55 decibels at the moment. This is obviously the loudest profile. Okay, so we can try 4K plus with no DLSS epic settings. Let's see how it handles it. So this is worst case settings at a very high resolution. Right, let's turn the volume down a little bit so you can hear. So we're now in game at the moment. We seem to be sitting nicely at about 170 to 175 watts on that GPU, so that's good news. Now I've got the latest NVIDIA driver. Now this doesn't seem to be any bug anymore, so that is quite handy. Now it seems to only be using about 80 watts on the actual CPU. I'm going to turn the audio off just so that I can actually speak and you can hear me. So let's have a look. So obviously 50 frames per second, but we are running at a very high res, high settings. But we are fully pushing this system with no issues, right? Temperature wise, we're moving up to about 79 degrees on that GPU and 93 on the CPU. So it is running hot, but we are at over 5 gigahertz on the CPU. And again, that 175 watts on the actual GPU. I'm going to play a little bit more and then we're going to get some actual thermals of the external chassis and the fan noise. So it seems to be a maximum of 55 decibels. Now I want to quickly just do a temperature test on the actual chassis itself. It seems to be remaining pretty cool so far. We are getting a hot spot about 42 in the centre of the keyboard. Seems very similar with a lot of these gaming laptops. The palm rests have remained nice and cool though. 34 over there, a bit warmer. And then 30, 35, feels nice and cool. I can feel a little bit of warmth under my palm, but it's not hot. And then we move to the top, 46, 48, where all the heat is pumping out. So maximum of 48. So overall, that doesn't seem too bad at all, considering the amount of watts we're actually pumping here. Have not seen the maximum cross load yet, but I'm going to try something else that's going to push the CPU more in a second. but it's certainly coping with the 80 and 175 of this finals. So now we've done a bit of gaming at that 4K plus. What I want to quickly do is just have a quick look at the 1200p. So if you watch here, I'm going to just literally click on the 1200p 440, restart now, and we're going to just try it again at 1200p and see how that looks. So here we go, going in at 1200p, everything looks massive. Now we're still at the 200%, which is why this looks ridiculous. So let's just get everything set back up and fire the game back up at 1200p. Now, if I was going to be using this for a while, I would change this down to 100%. But I mean, despite it being 1200p, it looks pretty good. You can see pixely on the cursor there. But overall, I could certainly live with this. I wouldn't choose it over the 4K, but if you were an esports player, I could live in this 1200p whilst using it. So you can see straight away by the size of my MSI overlay, we're obviously in 1200p here now, so this is going to look quite ridiculous. But let's see how it performs at 1200p. We're going to see how many more frames per second we're going to get with the same settings, but 1200p, and then it's just how fluid it feels and what the pixel density looks like. So now we're back in at 1200p. I've got the same epic settings, and looking at the frame rate, from switching to that 4K plus to 1200p, we're now getting a beautiful frame rate, which is, without any DLSS or any frame gen. So obviously this is the advantage of being able to turn down the render resolution. It looks very crisp. Now this is 1200p. It is actually on an 18-inch screen. This is looking quite impressive. I don't feel like it's a quality downgrade moving to this 1200. Now, the only thing that annoys me is the fact that you need to reboot to switch this actual mode on and off. I really wish it was a bit more seamless. But if you're having a sort of an evening of gaming, switching it down to 1200p is a really comfortable gaming experience. I thought, I'm never going to actually use this, I will only use the 4K, but using this now, I'm actually quite enjoying it. Now, something I do love is gaming on an 18-inch laptops. When I'm using an 18-inch, I really feel like I don't need an external display, which I always feel like when I am playing on a 16-inch or lower screen resolution. So I'm just going to leave the gaming there. I'm going to move back to the A-desk. Right, we're back. Now, as promised, I want to just talk about the power supply. Here we have this year's 400 watt, I should say power brick. This is a chunky power supply. Look at the size of that. Obviously, these are quite heavy duty this year. We've got that extra cross load up to 280 watts, which is why they're giving us such a big power supply. Now 400 watts, that's even more wattage than we had in the Alienware, which had 360 watts, and it's the same as we had with the Legion, that had a 400 watts. But I want to just quickly compare. This is the 330 watts from last year's Razer Blade 18, and I thought this one was quite a good size. So you can see the difference here between the 400 and the 330, and then this is one of the original 230 watts. So you can sort of year on year, they seem to be increasing in size with these top-end Razer Blade laptops, and you really do notice it. I mean, it's not a bad size to chuck in your bag, but this one is heavy. Let's pop it on their sides again so you can see the thickness as well. It is quite a chunky adapter. Now, they have taken away the braided cables this year, and I'm quite pleased with that, because these were, although they look nice being braided, it makes them more difficult to use the cables themselves. They're quite difficult to manipulate, whereas these are much easier. And it's a nice sort of feeling cable they've used. But overall, you're going to be carrying a heavy laptop and a heavy power supply. So although it is a compact 18-inch, although a bit thicker than last year's, it is a big package to be carrying around. So the laptop itself is 3.1 kilograms, as it says on the Razer's website, which is nice to see. And then when we add that power supply into the mix, you're talking another kilogram, so 4.1 kilograms for the entire package. So actually, that's not too bad. That is probably, the power supply and the laptop is about the same as the Alienware 18 we just reviewed. But just bear that in mind when you're buying these 18-inch laptops. So there we go, that's my thoughts so far on this Razer Blade 18. And I have to be honest, I am really impressed with it. It's a lovely package, but at a very high cost. Now, I did think the dual screen resolution was going to be a complete gimmick and I'd never use the 1200p. But having just used it there, I'm actually really impressed with it. 18 inches, 1200p, looks pretty good. So if you want that high frame rate and you don't want to use frame generation or DLSS to sort of get the frame rate up, this is a great option when you're gaming on the actual panel itself. Now, I do think if I had an evening to myself doing a bit of esports gaming, some finals, some Apex, some of the other games that I play, which are fast twitch shooters, I would use that 1200p. I think it's a real shame that we do need to actually reboot to get that 1200p, because on certain desktop monitors that have the switching resolution, one button click and it changes much quicker. But do you know what? I can certainly live with it. Now, not everything is positive. It does get very loud, and I don't like the fact that they've used slower RAM and a 1TB Gen 4 drive. They should be matching their competitors and putting in at least a 2TB in, preferably a Gen 5 drive in here. This is an expensive laptop, and they should have been using the 6400 RAM. Now, I believe this can accept it, so why didn't they supply it? Now, before I go, I do want to mention, please, if you can, pop us a like and subscribe if you haven't already. We will be doing the full review over the next week, and we've got plenty of other content coming with the Alienware reviews, and we are going to be just about to order the new Legion 18, which has just surfaced on their website. So please make sure you're subscribed if you're not already. And as always, thank you for watching.